Hi, everyone. My name's Melissa. My parents got divorced when I was in junior high. I stayed with my mom. A year and a half later, she got married to someone she'd met online. He lived in another country. My mom said we had to move there, but I didn't want to, so I went to live with my dad instead. He owns a very famous restaurant. It's only open in the evenings. You have to book a table months in advance to be able to eat there. One day, my dad called me into his office. When I came in, he jumped up from his seat. "I have a surprise for you," he said. After a while, he came back with a woman. He said, "Melissa, I want to introduce you to Delia. Delia is the purchasing manager at the restaurant. We've been together for a while. I'm sure you'll be surprised to hear this. Delia and I have decided to get married." Just like he said, that caught me by surprise. "Really?" was all I could say. 2 months after this conversation, my dad married Delia. So that's how I got a beautiful young stepmother. I don't want to sound prejudiced, but Delia seemed to me like the gold digger type. I thought she only married my dad, who is much older and is also her boss, for his money. My dad is no billionaire, but he is pretty well off. But it wasn't something I could bring up with him because from what I could see, he was madly in love with his new wife. As time passed, I got to know Delia better. She was definitely a gold digger. She was constantly going shopping for shoes and expensive handbags. I saw her showing off all the jewelry that my dad had bought for her to her friends. She'd converted a large bedroom into a walk-in closet. It was stuffed with expensive clothes. She continued to shop online in the evenings. She was getting stuff delivered to the house all the time. No matter how much she bought, it was never enough. Though I couldn't stand Delia, I could never say anything to her either. But one day, I noticed that her attitude towards me had suddenly changed. Until then, she used to ask me, "How are you doing? How is school?" She used to try to chat with me. But something happened and she stopped talking to me. She wouldn't even look at me. One night, as I was brushing my teeth, it dawned on me. I thought I had figured out why my stepmother was acting differently towards me. For years, I've kept a diary. For me, it's the same as going to therapy. I was able to overcome many of my issues thanks to this. Before I go to bed, I always write down whatever happened that day. So, had Delia secretly been reading my diary? That was my theory. If she had read my diary, it meant she had found out what I really thought of her. I'm sure she did not like that one bit, because everything I wrote about her was negative. So it made perfect sense that she'd get upset and stop talking to me. I used to leave my diary on a bookshelf in my room, but now I started carrying it in my bag. One night as I was writing, I realized something. I was censoring my thoughts about my stepmother. I wasn't writing the bad stuff about her in case she might end up reading it. This made me really uncomfortable. I told myself, I don't care if she reads it, I'll write whatever I think, and that's exactly what I did. One evening, I was in my room when my dad came in. Looking all serious, he said, "Melissa, I want to talk to you about something very important." He said, "Your education is really important. In class, you should be focusing on what the teachers say and nothing else." I stared at him in shock. "Dad, where is this coming from now? Did the school call you?" "No, they didn't call me. It doesn't matter how I found out. Please just pay attention to your studies," he said. After my dad left, I started thinking, what was that all about? Why did my dad need to give me that talk? And then I got it. It seemed like my stepmother had read my diary again, because I had recently written that I had a crush on someone, and I wasn't able to concentrate in class because I couldn't stop thinking about him. Delia had read this and immediately told my father about it. To me, this meant that my stepmother had declared war on me. She had started using what she learned from my diary to destroy my relationship with my dad. I was so angry I couldn't sleep all night. Who did she think she was? I decided to talk to her the following day. She wasn't home when I came back from school. After a while, she arrived again, carrying a ton of shopping bags. I went up to her and said, "I know you've been reading my diary. You need to stop doing that." She answered, "No, I'm not. Why would I be interested in your boring life?" "Then why did my dad give me the focus on your studies talk?" "I know you read that from my diary and told him," I replied. "I'm not interested in you or your diary. Please don't involve me in your childish games," she snapped back. That night, I talked to my dad about it, but I couldn't convince him. Delia is not someone who would read your diary. That's your private life. And she's civil enough to respect that, he said. He was obviously protecting his wife. Of course, I was sure she had read it, but my dad was still far too in love with her to see what was happening. I had to find a way to prove that Delia was reading my diary, and I did. I'd written earlier that I thought Delia was a gold digger, and she had read that. So I decided to write some things that weren't exactly true. Do you want to know what I wrote? Here it is. My stepmother really pissed me off today, so I talked to my dad tonight. Deep into our chat, I asked him, "Dad, why did you marry this woman? All she cares about is your money. Don't you realize that?" My dad replied, "Unfortunately, I've begun to suspect this as well. I love her very much, but she is shopping nonstop, and that's not normal at all." Yes! My dad is now becoming suspicious that she is a gold digger. He will definitely see the truth soon. That's what I wrote in my diary. Of course, I never had that conversation with my dad. I made up every word of it. My plan was really simple. My stepmother would read what I had written and ask my dad, "How could you think that about me?" So my dad would immediately come and talk to me. And first, I would prove that Delia had been reading my diary. And second, my dad would know what I thought about her, and maybe he would start having some doubts about her too. The next day, I left my diary on my desk and went to take a shower. I spent a long time in the shower to give my stepmother plenty of time to read it. I was wondering what would happen next. My dad didn't come to my room that night. That meant my stepmother hadn't talked to him. He didn't come the next day either. What happened? Why hadn't Delia confronted my dad? Would she keep quiet after what she'd found out? Yes, for some reason, she kept quiet. Do you know what she started doing instead? She began removing everything she had bought from our house. Of course, she was doing this secretly. But every time I looked into her walk-in closet, I noticed there were fewer and fewer of those expensive bags, shoes, and clothes. Where was she bringing all this stuff and why? Since my plan didn't work out exactly like I hoped, I decided to write something that could have a bigger impact. Here is what I wrote. I stopped by my dad's restaurant today. He looked really sad. I asked him why. He didn't want to tell me at first, but then he said, "I'm thinking about divorcing Delia. Unfortunately, our suspicions have been confirmed." I was both happy and surprised by this unexpected news. I think she'll finally be out of here soon. Do I need to spell it out? Of course I made all that up too. Again, I left my diary lying around and jumped into the shower. I was sure my stepmother was reading the things I wrote about her while I was in there. My dad was at the restaurant that night. I was so curious about what would happen. This time, it would definitely come out that my stepmother had read my diary. I thought Delia would call my dad on the phone and my dad would rush home, but again, things didn't pan out as I expected. The house was really quiet. I ran into Delia as I was going into the kitchen. She was about to go out with a huge suitcase. She left without even looking at me. Of course, I panicked big time because of me. My stepmother had left home. I called my dad. I couldn't tell him about my diary. I only told him that Delia had left with a suitcase. Dad came home immediately. "Delia's phone is turned off. I can't reach her," he said. I couldn't tell him the truth because I was so scared. Half an hour later, my dad said, "Melissa, I realized something weird. Delia took all her jewelry with her. Perhaps that's normal, but there was a considerable amount of cash in the safe. She took it all. But that's the company's money. And Delia knows this. I don't want to use this word, but this counts as theft." And then he went to the police. He learned unbelievable things about Delia there. It turns out she was, in fact, a professional gold digger. She would marry much older, well-off men and then steal their money. She'd start working for people whom she had set her eyes on. Then she would start flirting with them. After marrying them, she would take as much of their money as she could and then disappear. I had figured out that she was a gold digger, but obviously I couldn't have guessed this much. Quite a bit of time passed. Then one day, I saw Delia on the news on TV. She had trapped someone rich again. But this time, the man found out the truth after doing some research before marrying her. And he went to the police. I was really relieved to see Delia in handcuffs. It turned out that she'd been hiding the jewelry and the money she stole in a safe at her mother's house. This is how my dad got back his company's money and most of the jewelry he bought for Delia. By the way, I keep saying Delia, but it turned out her real name is Fiona. With every marriage, she was making up a new name and using a fake ID. Months later, I was able to tell my dad the truth about the diary. I couldn't foresee what his reaction would be. He burst out laughing. "Just like your mom, you're a force to be reckoned with," he said. My only intention had been to prove my stepmother had been reading my diary. But my little game ended up leading to something I could have never expected. Hi, everybody. My name is Ileana. My dad used to work at a company that made printers. He lost his job when the company went bankrupt. He had been working there since graduating from college. He spent 17 years there. It was the only job he ever had. He applied for similar jobs, but nobody would hire him. He ended up getting depressed. He sat around in the living room all day watching TV. His relationship with my mom deteriorated. They started fighting all the time. The atmosphere at home was really bad. When my dad lost his job, he got severance pay. When that money ran out, my parents started to have trouble making ends meet. My mom has 2 brothers. I'd only met her younger brother maybe half a dozen times. I didn't even know what he did for a living, just that he was really well off. When my mom became desperate, she called him and asked him to help find my dad a job. He said, "Have him come to my office tomorrow. I have just the job for him." When she said this over dinner, my dad said, "I will have to go, but I don't trust him. He never helps anyone unless there's something in it for himself." They never told us what job my uncle offered my dad. But my dad started leaving home early in the morning and coming back late at night. I asked my mom, "Has Dad started working?" She said, "He will soon, but he's going to work from home. Right now, he's making preparations for that. Don't tell anyone about it." I didn't understand why my mom said that. What kind of secret work was my dad going to be doing? That weekend, something funny happened. My mom said to my brother and me, "Do not come out of your room tonight, no matter what happens." I asked, "What if we have to use the bathroom? We can't come out even then?" She gave me a serious look and said, "Ileana, this is really important. You are not to leave your room." I didn't want to go to sleep that night so I could figure out what was happening. I pressed my ear to the floor. I heard a lot of footsteps. I could hear people talking, but I couldn't make out anything they were saying. I stayed up until 3:30 in the morning. The sounds from downstairs had petered out. I couldn't stay awake anymore, so I fell asleep. Why were there so many people around that night? Who were they? Did they bring something? I had so many questions, but I couldn't ask my parents because I didn't want them to find out I stayed up and eavesdropped. Even though my dad was working from home, we were barely seeing him. My mom said that he was working nights and sleeping during the day, but something was off. We didn't know what his job was. I tried asking my mom. She wouldn't give me a straight answer. She just said, "It's something similar to his old job." I couldn't ask my dad because even though he was working again, he still looked depressed. He used to joke around all the time. He loved making us laugh. Now he had become a completely different man, and I missed my old dad very much. The only positive thing was that we were doing better financially. Around that time, the school year ended and summer vacation began. One morning, my brother said to me, "Can you get my bike out of the basement?" I said, "Why don't you do it yourself? Why are you asking me?" He blushed. He was embarrassed. "The basement is so dark. I know there's nothing to be scared of, but I'm still scared. Please don't mock me." I knew he couldn't help it because I am still terrified of clowns. "Okay, let's go and save your bike from the monsters in the basement," I said. He said, "Hey, I told you not to mock me." I said, okay, I was just kidding, and started walking. He followed me. To get into the basement, we first had to go outside. The entrance was at the back of the house. I couldn't remember the last time I went down there. I didn't think there was anything important there other than my brother's bike anyway. That's why I was sure my parents hadn't gone down there in a long time. I was so surprised when we got to the door because there was a keypad lock on the wall next to it. I pushed the door. It didn't budge. Normally this door is never locked, but now it was. And here was this keypad lock. We needed a passcode to enter our basement now? This was the craziest thing I'd ever seen in my life. When I touched one of the buttons, the screen said, "Enter the 4-digit passcode." I asked my brother, "What do you think the passcode is?" "I have no idea," he answered. I decided to try some numbers. First, I entered my brother's birth year. Didn't work. Then I tried mine. That didn't work either. How about Mom's? When I typed in her birth year, I set off a really loud alarm. Of course, we panicked. Apparently, the alarm was set to go off after 3 unsuccessful attempts. A few moments later, the basement door opened. There were 2 men whom I'd never seen before. Did they work with my dad? Since my dad was asleep at the moment, what were these guys doing there by themselves? They were relieved to see us. The one with the beard asked, "Are you Mr. Bradford's kids?" We nodded. My brother said, I got my bike down in the basement. We just wanted to pick it up." He said, "Stay right there. I'll grab it for you." That's how we found out there was something strange going on in our basement. I told my brother, "Wait here for your bike. I'm going to talk to Mom." My mom was out. When she came back, I told her what happened. "I should have told you. The basement is your father's office now. Those people you saw are 2 of his colleagues," she said. "But what are they doing in the basement?" I asked. Mom said, "I told you, they are working. Don't go back there." Just as she said that, I noticed the ring on her finger. I said, "Mom, is that new? Is that a diamond?" My mom involuntarily pulled her hand away and hid it behind her back. She said, "No, it's not a real diamond. It's fake." Then she quickly got up and walked away. I didn't think that was a fake diamond. If it were fake, she wouldn't be so nervous. She would show it to me like it was no big deal. So now we had the money to buy such expensive jewelry? Now I was even more curious about my father's new job. But I had no way of finding out what was going on. Meanwhile, our family was getting richer. My parents got themselves expensive SUVs. All the furniture in the house was replaced. A new phone, a tablet, a computer. My mom got us whatever we wanted. We were seriously rich now, but for some reason we were still living in the same old house. It was really not very nice. Why did we not move out? Did it have something to do with what my dad was doing in the basement, the job I still knew nothing about? Early one morning, the truth came out. I finally found out what was being done in the basement. It was a huge shock for all of us. That day, our life turned upside down. I said earlier that my dad worked for a company manufacturing printers for 17 years. He was an expert in printing technologies. Do you know what my uncle offered my dad since he was aware of his expertise? Printing counterfeit money. Yes, unfortunately, my dad was printing fake banknotes in our basement. The men my brother and I had met were in charge of distributing the fake money around the country. In order not to attract attention, they were printing $20 bills, which no one checks. My uncle was already making a living from illegal activities. He wanted to make even more money by going into the counterfeiting business using my dad's expertise. And that's exactly what happened. Both my dad and him made a lot of money from it. The police raided our basement and caught my dad and the guys he worked with red-handed. My brother came to my room. Of course, we couldn't go out. We found out what happened afterwards. It's really interesting how this all came about. After picking up his bike, my brother found 2 $20 bills stuck to each other outside the basement. The men probably dropped them as they were carrying out the counterfeit money. My brother didn't realize the money was fake and used it to buy ice cream. The ice cream seller became suspicious looking at the bills. He noticed that the ink on one of them was still wet. That's how we figured out they were fake and asked my brother where he got them. Then he called the cops. The police surveilled our house for a while. After the raid that night, my dad, my uncle, and 15 more people were arrested. They're all in jail right now. There's both a fine and jail time for this kind of crime. They seized everything from our house, too. We're staying with my grandparents. Our life was completely upended. No matter how desperate my dad was, he never should have gone into something like this. I'm so mad at my mom, too, because she let it happen. Now our family is broken. I know that they did this for us as much as they did it for themselves, but I